Hi, welcome to a new episode of A Waking Moment podcast. I'm Dani Palacio. I am grateful to be your host. And you guys may recognize Tiffany because she's been on a couple different times. And I asked her to join today so that we could talk about something that Tiffany introduced me to. I'm not even going to say what it is, but I want to introduce her. So, Tiffany is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. She also works in New York and LA. She's a somatic stylist. Her magic, her witchy self gets to like work with the crown chakra through the hair. She was telling me that primarily her clients are men identifying and queer, which I think is beautiful. And although I think the next time we get together, you need to cut my hair.
I would love to. I would love to cut your hair. Let's do it.
I value her insight, her wisdom. She is grounded and she's calm to my soul. And I have found that her perspectives may not always be mainstream, which I personally love. Yet she has a very eloquent, graceful style in sharing the wholeness of things. So I hope that you enjoy this podcast with her. Welcome, Tiffany. Thank you for joining
Thank
me
you.
today.
Danny, thank you for that. That is so, oh my gosh. I'm gonna take that compliment in right now. That's
Yes,
really,
please take a moment.
wow. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk about what we kind of set up for today. So,
Yeah, it's going
um,
to be fun. So everybody, there'll be notes, obviously, because I
mm,
always do summary notes. So if we mention something, if there's a resource, please don't feel like you have to go write it down. It will all be
yeah.
given to you.
Mm,
And so I'm probably naming this podcast. You don't have to like everyone, and that could be a first you've ever heard. And so Tiffany and I have been chatting, talking about this for months. Like we
mm.
started this whole conversation last year.
Yes.
And yeah, right? Like,
Yeah,
oh, we
we
should
really
talk about
did.
that. And I believe you even mentioned the concept of harmonies, notes and
Mm.
harmony in one of the podcasts with you in it. Like I think that
Yeah.
came out. And
Yes.
I realized after that, I was like, we need to talk about this more because it's such a profound, beautiful shift in perspective about how
Mm.
we can relate as humans.
Yeah.
And now it's 2025, and our world is, particularly in America, has been shaken, has been stirred, has been activated, has been all kinds of things. And in my
Yeah.
private sessions with clients, they're walking in overwhelmed. They're walking in feeling highly burdened. And honestly, several of them are in the place of the loss of hope. And so there's
Yeah.
this deep grief that's happening. And it is such a beautiful opportunity to shift this. And so,
Mm.
yeah, so on the topic of you don't
Mm.
have to like everybody, uh,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about how we can shift perspective about how we see things and how we
Mm.
can create things and how in relationship, because whether you know it or not, guys, you're in relationship with absolutely everything that is around you. You're in
Yeah.
relationship to self, obviously. You're in relationship with food that you eat. You're in
Mm.
relationship to music that you enjoy. You're in relationship with the person who's checking you out in the grocery store. And you're in relationship in the more conventional ways of partnership, family relationships, sibling
Mm.
relationships, those kinds of things that we might instantly go to. But, or maybe I should say, and this concept of you don't have to like everybody
Mhm.
is deep and it may be jarring, even, or maybe you
Yeah.
already have the concept, but we're going to give you some different ways to look at it. So, Tiffany, I would love
Mm.
for you to talk about the beautiful music that is your
Mm.
life
Yeah.
and the notes and the harmony and the balances, and if you
Mhm.
could kind of share some of the, how did you even get this? Like, was it downloaded? Was it through a conversation? Was it in
Yeah.
relationship? So
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the first things that I mean, our judgments of others and our judgments of ourselves are inextricably linked. And I came across that concept years ago. And of course, sometimes like we come across something that we can intellectually understand, but that we don't necessarily immediately emotionally integrate to internally like understand for ourselves. And some things have happened over the years that really pushed on me to look at and reconcile the judgments that I felt about myself and about others, and how that shows up, and how we sometimes have either such deep shame that we carry internally around things that we experience, feel, whatever, judgment, and the ways that sometimes that can be so hard to hold that we then find ourselves projecting that out onto others
Well,
and
isn't that
finding,
true? Like
yeah,
just that itself. Like, okay,
yes,
y'all, if you're holding shame or judgment,
yes,
and you're not owning it and you're not
hmm
recognizing it, you're going to project it. I love that. It's a
you
great
really will.
reminder. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's reliable too. Like anytime I found myself, even if somebody was, let's say, objectively doing something harmful, um, that can be true. And also when there's a real heightened trigger around it, there's something also then for you to look at too. That that has been true in every experience I've had, where I feel that maybe my judgments or something have been a little more intense than simply the thing itself. So from that, I came across at some point some different components that got pieced together as thinking about relationship in terms of musical notes, because I felt I need to find a way to be able to be at peace with the fact that I just don't like this person, or I
Mm-hmm.
just do not like what happened just now, and not be sort of tortured by it, not knowing where to put it or how to hold it,
Yeah.
and not being stuck in what continues to separate us, which is having to make something smaller or worse than you, better or worse. If I have to
Mm-hmm.
make you better than me or make you worse than me, I'm in trouble. We're in trouble if we can't get out of that dynamic. And so the musical notes kind of felt like this, incredible metaphor for how we can honor that something doesn't resonate and that we just don't like it, but that it still has a place in the world that's useful and important. And thus, getting the opportunity to drop the good or bad, like you have been talking about, um,
Mm-hmm.
and simply just looking at what is, which is, I don't like it. And so musical notes, thinking about, you have your melody, I have my melody. We all have our own really individual and distinct energy signatures, and melodies, and so do other people. And when we come in contact with each other and we notice these relationships we have with everything and everyone,
Mm-hmm.
you notice whether those harmonies are dissonant, or the melodies together are harmonic. And then you get to feel into like, well, this feels dissonant, remembering that dissonant melodies also serve a purpose in breaking up stagnation, for instance.
Right.
So coming into contact with things we don't like it doesn't help us to just label it as bad,
Right.
because it can be so supportive. Um, a lot of times we need that something to be dislodged in that disharmony. We need some stagnation to be rustled up in that. So that was the first thing. And I started thought experimenting with it by every time I'm noticing myself feeling judgmental or starting to feel some of that creep up, I'm immediately putting in place like, okay, musical notes. All right, this is disharmonious. Okay, I don't need to make it anything else. It feels peaceful. And I wanted to say as well, the permission that I gave myself to recognize, oh, I just don't like this, or this isn't harmonious, actually is what allowed me to then be able to release the resistance or the pushing up against of the thing I'm judging or the person I'm judging. So
Yeah.
that if it's time to work together, to collaborate, which it's going to be time to do here soon because of gestures broadly to the
All this
world,
stuff.
because of it all. Um, Being able to accept and surrender to like, all right, I don't like this, and we've got work to do.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves room for you to hold the both and of like, I don't like it, and all right, we got to do this. Let's work together, in some scenarios. So
Yeah.
that felt really good to again witness within myself internally that, oh, that actually freed me to be allowed to say, I don't like this.
Right.
Right.
We need that space because we're so conditioned to meet other people's expectations. And then we're
Yeah.
so conditioned to have expectations around someone. And
Mm.
that's that judgment game that you were talking about. It's also the comparison game, you
Yeah.
know, and we don't actually, as a human race, know how to process that very well, right? So we get stuck then, and then it just gets
Yeah.
this snowball effect of like it gets bigger and bigger inside of us, and we end up feeling, that's when we
Mm.
end up feeling out of balance. That's when there's too much sticky energy.
Mm.
Like I would call it that. Like I look for the dark spots, I look for the sticky spots,
Mm.
because it kind of needs to be rotor-rooted. And I would love not to rotor-rooter so much. And I would love for
Yeah.
people to be able to say, oh, I've come into acceptance
Mm.
around how I feel. And whatever that feeling is, is. And so I'm going to share a
Mm.
story to help people kind of get, I'm coming back to you to finish, well, not finish, but continue this conversation. So I'm
Yeah.
going to tell a quick story. When I was young, I was in my mid 20s. I was working in corporate America, and I didn't like a manager. And actually, he was my manager.
You
That's
can
right.
say it. You can say
Yes.
it.
Oh, it's so long ago. I have no idea where he is, but I didn't like him. I thought he was misogynistic. I thought he was belittling. I thought he was just
Mm.
unfair. And it really pissed me off at the time. And so I was talking to a coworker about it, and of course I was venting.
Mm.
And so, and she just looked at me matter of factly, and she said, "You know what my mom always says?" And I said, "I have no idea what your mom said." She goes, "You don't have to like everyone. The world is a very big place, and it doesn't matter if you don't like a couple people, because there are billions on this planet." And I went,
That's right.
"What?" Now, that's not exactly the musical note concept, but the idea of giving permission to allow yourself to process what you're feeling and accept what you're feeling so
Yes.
that you can continue. And honestly, if I think about it now,
Mm.
I really think I worked for that guy for another 2 years. So
How did
it
that go?
wasn't, yeah, it wasn't one of those relationships that I could just jump out of. He was my manager. I wanted the job. Like, I eventually had to figure out how to recognize his
Mm.
position, his place, and recognize that I was young and just brand new to this corporate America life. And it helped formed me, around how I was going to show up in this environment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, it gave me a good list of what I wanted in a manager moving
Isn't, and
forward.
that's how valuable is that?
Yeah.
Like that you got the opportunity then from recognizing the first step in the door to like, oh, I don't have to like everyone.
Yeah.
And especially as women being conditioned in the ways that we are, because you might, and I both grew up in different parts of the Midwest, and there's a stereotype about the Midwesterners and the niceness, like you were saying, the Midwest nice,
Oh, yeah.
that we're taught that being kind or loving looks a certain way. And that's
Hmm.
another thing I notice is musical notes allows for a sort of movement. And music is so fluid, and there's a rigidity in labeling kindness or love and saying it has to look like this,
Hmm.
when every situation we're in, every dynamic we're in any relationship with anything, is its own unique energy signature that requires us to be present to recognize what the medicine of the moment is.
Hmm.
And if we have a rigid idea about what being loving and kind is, i.e., gotta pretend like I like you if I don't, or just not acknowledging my feelings really at the base of that, right? Um, then that's not very loving or kind. And so therefore, whatever that rigid, concept is just, it's not helpful.
Yeah. And I think women and men may have different experiences and expressions of um,
Yeah.
being nice, right? Like for women, at least in my life, I was conditioned to smile, whether I wanted to smile or not. And I
Hmm.
remember a counselor that said, "Are you smiling because it's genuine?" Like,
Oh.
and I was like, "Well, of course it is." And I got real, like,
Oh no.
ruffled feathers up, right? Like,
Yeah.
And then she's like, I want you to try not to smile so much. I want you intentionally not to smile.
God
And
bless
as
this
long as you,
woman.
right? And it was a very physical, mental, emotional processing of,
Mm.
do I feel like smiling in this moment? And I got to reclaim that part of myself. And so for women, it might be smiling, it might be making everything okay. Everything's okay. It's all okay.
Oh
We're,
yeah.
and it's also listening to
Mm.
stuff that, oh, please just stop. You're
Mm.
vomiting all over me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I can't, I don't
Yeah.
want to listen to
Yeah.
the toxic shit that's coming out of your mouth. Like,
Yep.
I'm not in the mood for that right now. I'm not in the,
Totally.
you know,
I
open
can't receive
space of
this.
let it out. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but I think for men, and honestly, I'm obviously not a man.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that they're conditioned differently around being nice.
Mm.
It could be anything from including them in a sports activity, someone that they don't like, but they include them in a sports activity. It could be the
Yeah.
handshake that men are conditioned to do. Like, I
You shake
remember
their
going to,
hand. Yeah.
yeah, you shake, you reach out, you
Yeah.
you extend your hand out to someone,
Yeah.
and honestly, that's a really powerful, energetic gesture.
Yes.
It's the
There's a whole
hand.
language. There's a
It's,
language
yeah,
of handshakes.
completely, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so, and I'm sure there's a lot more. I can't think of anything right now, but I just want to bring that awareness that it's not just a feminine or a
Hmm.
woman based thing. It's all people are
Yes.
in this place.
Mm.
Um, oh, and then, oh yeah, this was the other thing that popped into my awareness when you were talking about the notes and the melodies and the harmonies, and you know, um, and I thought, oh, that's so interesting. And so I maybe all of us have had this experience where you're listening to a song and you're like,
Mhm.
"Oh my goodness, this song is so beautiful, so inspiring, so uh, joyful, so it has so much
Yes.
rhythm and it has like all this stuff." And then you get to a place in the song where you're like, "What
Oh,
just happened?" Like,
yeah.
they introduced a new instrument, or they shifted what you thought you really liked, and then all of a
Oh
sudden
my
you're like,
God.
is this the same song? Like,
There's
where
like
did this
three
come?
songs that just popped into my head where I have had that exact experience.
Yeah. And
And
you're
I
like,
changed the song every time that part of the song. I listen to the first minute and a half, and then when that part comes, I'm like, okay, next. That's funny. Oh my
yes.
God, that's so real.
And so we do that
Yeah.
because we're not comfortable. We're not
Mm.
comfortable in that space of saying, I don't like this. This
Mm.
doesn't resonate. This is
Yeah.
not what I want in this moment. Or, where your energies are missing, right? You're
Mm.
you're
Mhm.
you're missing each other. You're not connecting and having
Mhm.
synchronicity and
Mhm.
alignment. You're having this jarring experience, and
Mm.
we make it wrong all the time. Like, we make
Yeah.
it wrong and then we shut it off, just like you turn the
Yeah.
song off, you change the
Yeah.
radio, or you put in a new whatever.
Yeah.
I
Which
was
can be
about to say
agency, but
cassette, you guys. I was about to say put a
turn the
new
set off.
cassette in. Yeah, I'm like, I'm aging myself. I've just exposed myself. Anyway,
I remember
so
this.
Tiffany, on this idea of greater acceptance,
Mm.
and not only acceptance, but actually using it as an opportunity to enhance or make the harmony, the balance of that. Um, I will use the word beautiful,
Okay.
because it's
Yeah.
that feeling of like, you're going along and it's feeling really good, and then there's this spot that isn't. And but in time, in
Mm.
hindsight, if
Yeah.
you were to look back, you might actually really appreciate the out of character, disharmony,
Mm.
moment.
Yeah. 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 That's very real.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think. there's so many things in my head right now because of course there's so many vantage points and so many different types of interactions we can have where being able to be present to assess where you are in time and space is so much a part of the way we can even accurately indicate whether like it is time to turn the song off, or do I have the capacity to maybe just hear what is being said? Can I accept that, like the manager, like this is my job, this is my manager, I don't want to quit, like I want to work here. And so how then can I integrate my understanding and my surrender to the reality that I don't like the way this person behaves, for
Right.
instance. And yet here I am and need to work with them. So there's like building up nervous system capacity and resilience so that you can hold the truth of all of it. Because one of the things I notice, and I think I've told you about this before, but I know people have had these experiences, but I've never heard anyone talk about them to where like I ended up having to coin a term for it. There's certain types of experiences where I coin the term of a physical tuning event, where something kind of ordinary or banal happens to you. But as you're experiencing it, you recognize this incredible wisdom in it where you're like, oh my gosh, this simple thing that just happened has illuminated a really profound wisdom about, I think, my life. And one of those was an experience where um, I I have endometriosis. Birth control is actually the only thing that can be prescribed for women with endometriosis to help with the pain that happens in our period
Mm-hmm.
when we start. I did not want to continue taking it at one point a few years back because of the side effects of birth control itself. And
Right.
so there's a middle of the night. I'm in so much pain. I get
Mm-hmm.
into a hot shower. I'm standing in the hot shower. And I remember, Ram Dass talks about being with pain and letting pain in and not trying to push it away or push it
Mm-hmm.
down or tamp it down. And so I decided I'm going to be with it. And so I'm standing in the shower and I let the pain just radiate through my body. I'm not fighting against it. I'm not trying to dissociate from it. It sucked so bad. It was not fun. And then because I just let it be there, I suddenly experienced a moment of it having dissipated. And the shower was like the nicest hot shower I've ever taken in my life. And feeling this sense of, oh my God, like I'm able to experience this amazing thing right now in this severe moment of pain. This is crazy. Of course, the pain came back, and I thought, I'm going to do that again. And so I kind of sat there for a few minutes, cycling through the experience of letting myself be with what was there, what was unpleasant, what was dissonant,
Mm-hmm.
and then noticing how by it's here, this is what is, suddenly the nervous system capacity, the capacity you have at any given moment to take in the fullness of your reality and what's all happening in it, when we fight against, push against, judge, dissociate from, those acts soak up the entirety of our capacity to take in reality and therefore
So
become the
good.
whole story. That suddenly now that's the pain's the whole story. But
Mm-hmm.
when we can let it be there and sit with it and invite it in and notice how it feels bad and
Yeah.
accept this sucks, but
Right.
okay, here it is. Suddenly, this space in our capacity to take in the rest of reality opens up. And now there's space for me to actually enjoy this hot shower. And I just was thinking to myself, how many opportunities have I missed in my life because the circumstances of my life didn't feel good or weren't what I wanted them to be. And my pushing up against resistance, judgment, whatever, soaked up the entirety of my capacity to be present with and notice what else was also happening simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that was like one of those physical tuning events that gave me a piece of wisdom that I've now had to use ever since.
Right. I love that you use the word capacity because it's been very active in my life,
Mm,
and building, capacity is
mm,
one of those things that wasn't natural for me. Like I didn't understand the concept of capacity,
me either.
um,
Yeah.
and to grow it, that we can cultivate,
Yeah. Who knew? I
and
didn't.
it's like, what? Like I was so, I was in such a place of not knowing. It was outside of my experience, and
Mhm.
accepting that what is like the thing, that was all there was. So like when I I mean, several years, well, not several years ago. Anyway, a few years ago, I had severe anxiety,
Mm,
and the stress and anxiety was the only thing I could feel. And when I
mm,
would be around a certain person, or I'd be in a meeting, or I would experience, it would just rise up and take over like a nasty little monster.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would, I would freeze. I would, I would diminish myself. I wouldn't talk. I wouldn't give my ideas. And
Mm,
I left those conversations or those meetings
mm,
feeling horrible about myself. Like, oh my God,
yeah.
you have no spark left. You're not a professional. You can't even communicate, and it was
Yeah.
this total cycle of like negative,
Yeah.
negative judgments about myself, thinking that that would somehow make me feel better. And it didn't. It
No.
cycled into such a way that I actually lost capacity, right? Like
Mm,
I've I've been in conversations and in awareness now for several months about building capacity. And
mm,
I'm like, I don't really know how to do that. But I loved
yes.
your example of sitting with whatever is causing the pain, physical, emotional, spiritual, the uncomfortableness that you're
Mm,
feeling in that moment,
yeah.
and allowing it to be. You're not
Yes.
saying it's good or bad. You're just acknowledging that it exists.
Yeah.
And that automatically builds capacity for something else to be
Yes.
um, in the same space. And as you were talking and sharing about that, I don't know if this is the same, so I'm just going to share what came in, which was, I think people will resonate with building a muscle.
Yes.
So
Yep.
you have a certain set of strength
Mm,
just because of what you daily do or what you whatever.
yes.
Um, but
Yeah.
now you are taking a new job, and you're, let's say, delivering packages or working in a warehouse, and you now have to lift regularly 50 pounds,
Yeah.
40 pounds, 20 pounds up and over the shoulder, like, and you build those muscles because it's a
Hmm.
necessity for you to get to where you need to be and to
Yeah.
deliver what you said you want. Now, maybe you don't want to work in a warehouse, but the concept
Mm,
of building muscle, I
yes.
feel, is similar to
Yeah.
building capacity, because
Yes. It
you
is.
don't need the strength to lift 100 pounds all the time,
No.
but you want the ability to have
Mm,
it when necessary.
right.
And that, in my mind, like, that clicked of like,
Yeah.
oh, that's capacity, that's the spaciousness of
Yeah.
being able to say, I've got room for this. I
Yes.
I can be in both. It's not or, but
Mm,
it's and.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if that's why I think noticing first and foremost, like, can I change the situation? I've identified I don't like this.
Hmm.
Is it possible for me to change it right now? And if the answer is no, then that's a different set of now here are the options we have with that answer. If it's yes, of course, then we can go from there and be like, all right, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to maybe not talk to this person anymore, or I'm not going to go to this place anymore and spend my time here doing this thing. And those are choices we can make. But
Are those choices based out of the no? Those ones that
sure.
you just
Yeah.
said?
Like, I don't like this. I don't like this song. Well, I won't listen to it. I don't really like how this person treats me. I don't think I want to be friends with them anymore.
Hmm.
And that's one thing. But then when it's like a person at a job, that we really love the job, there's like different sort of, by being present, the wisdom of the moment becomes accessible for you to go, well, what's the next right thing to do? Because of course, like you were saying, when you're in overwhelm, especially by the time we're in overwhelm, it's like, well, here we are, like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
when we've
I'll
come.
figure this out when I process stuff.
Yeah, the time to work on this stuff is certainly not when the overwhelm's already there. When the
Hmm.
overwhelm's already there, it's like what all we can really do is just try to be with it as much as we can until we can get to some safety behind a closed door or whatever it is where we can sit with ourselves and reassess
Yeah, that is
whatever.
so true. I
Yeah.
would leave those meetings, and this was all work from home kind of stuff. and I would go have a good cry, or I would literally take myself around the block, walk very
Yeah.
fast around the block, and come back. And
Movement. What a
movement,
great outlet. That's a perfect somatic outlet with overwhelm.
yes, because it's
Meditation's not
that.
always the best answer. Sometimes
Oh,
it's run, move,
yeah,
lift.
yeah. It reminds me of something that happened last week. I was in a group call, and we were talking about things, and it's a very supportive, like, group of women around. Oh goodness, around that whole concept of like, when you have an emotion, it we were encouraged to let it out, to actually not only let it out, but to amplify it, to make it bigger,
Mm,
bigger, 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 bigger.
yeah.
And then, like, let it out, right? Like,
Yeah. Release
stomp it
it.
out, dance it out, yell it out. Like, and I wrote
Wow.
in and I said, well, could you do the soothing? Because we've also learned to soothe ourselves, to give
I do
ourselves a
that a
hug,
lot.
and to stroke our arm, and to touch our face, and to feel our legs, and
Those are so good. Those are such good somatic work
right.
exercises. Yeah. I do
But
them
the
a lot.
answer was no. Actually, the lady leading it was like, it's not a no. She said, but sometimes we have to build that energy of frustration or agitation or dislike to a place where it grows and grows and grows, so you can get it out, right?
Yes.
And then once
That's
it's
very real.
out, then you can be like,
Yeah.
oh, body, I love you. Oh, here, you are safe. It was safe.
Yeah.
And then the soothing can happen. And so it's like, so back to music, you know, I'm not great with musical words here, so bear with me, everybody. Um, but it's like building the crescendo, right? Like, you have to build, build, build,
Yes.
build, build. And it's like, you've listened to a song or a musical where they're just building this beautiful climax,
Yes.
and then it's boom, blah,
Yeah.
and it's like this outlet that feels like I can take a deep
Mm.
breath.
Mm.
And I would imagine that that's going to happen when
Yeah.
we're in this kind of energy that doesn't match, isn't what did you call it?
Dissonant, harmonic,
Yeah,
melodic.
dissonant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just want to say to everyone, if you're still listening, which I hope you are, that the whole idea of this conversation is to give you permission, if you need it,
Mm. Mhm.
to work with what is,
Mhm.
and to not take it internally and to make
Mhm.
yourself wrong or bad for it, but to accept that it is here, that it
Yeah.
is, and work with it. Work with it to figure out a way for it to be part of your music.
Mhm.
I think another analogy might be, well, at least from my traditions, about weaving thread. And
Mhm.
sometimes you weave a thread and you're like, oh, look at that black part of that thread. That's not supposed to
Mm.
be there. But
Yeah.
in actuality, when the tapestry's all done and you look at it, it's magnificent. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And that one little black spot or that one little thread that wasn't really supposed to be there is actually adding to the overall creation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Agree.
Okay, so um, I want to kind of, I don't think uh, it's not too far off from what we've been talking about, but I want to bring in the whole concept of being a people pleaser,
Yeah.
and how people pleasing, um, the conditioning, it's kind of like what
Yeah.
we talked about, that nice, where you do things that you are conditioned to do because it is acceptable. It is
Yeah.
it
It's
is
the right thing to
expected.
do.
The right thing to do. You don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. You don't want to,
Mm.
rock the boat. You don't want to be that streaky note that everybody goes, "Ee,"
We
right?
want
So
to fit in.
yeah, you
Yeah.
want to fit in,
Want to fit
exactly.
in. And
So,
maybe this is what I was told I got to do to fit in, so I'll do it, like kind of
right.
thing. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think for
Mm.
me, in my life and my experiences,
Yeah.
You know, I say kind of proudly in some strange way that I am a recovering people pleaser,
Yeah. Same. I like
you
that
know?
term.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's never going to be perfect. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not I don't even want to be perfect. Um in that concept of, you
In that
know,
prescriptive way that's
yeah,
empty. Yeah.
yeah. I want to be real. I want to be authentic. I want to be genuine. You know,
Yeah.
it's why this podcast exists, because your expression of authenticity can be very
Mhm.
different than my expression of authenticity. And we have to learn
Yes.
how to have both
Yes.
exist.
It must
Because,
necessarily be. Because you're you and I'm me, right? Like if we're these
yeah,
unique energy signatures and you and I are really being ourselves, we will necessarily express it differently, right?
yes.
At least
And
on some level.
totally, we have different words for different things. We have
Mm,
different concepts of how something works or something is built, or, you know, and all of it
yeah.
is okay. All of it is it, you know, like you
Yeah.
get to be you, I get to be me, and everyone that's listening gets to be themselves, right?
Please, please do, I say to the listener. Please do be yourself,
Yeah,
whatever that means.
whatever that might mean. And
Mm,
so I know that it's still very common
mm,
to identify identify the things that you like about someone and identify the things that you don't like about someone.
mhm,
Sometimes that's necessary to set good boundaries.
mhm.
Other times it's destructive because the person that is showing up, oh, this is going to get trippy. The person that's showing up is that person in that moment. And
Yes.
if you keep that person frozen,
Mhm.
stuck in that one moment of one expression, you will never get to know the genius, the beauty, the power of
Mm,
another aspect of them.
yes.
So, and I have seen this and experienced it more often where people are so quick to cut people out, to
Yes.
to make wrong, and then it's this pushing energy
Yes.
of, oh, pushing away.
Yes.
And you don't have to like everyone, but
Yeah.
wouldn't it be nice to have the capacity to allow them to grow, shift, and change? I
Yes.
am not the same woman that I was 20 years ago. More than that, 30 years ago.
A
When
year ago.
well, that too, but I was going back to my manager example.
Oh yeah, you're not
Yeah.
the
So
same woman.
that was a long time ago. I'm not that same woman.
Mm-mm.
And, you know, I would have treated that whole situation differently.
Mhm.
Um, and I have over the years stepped
Right.
up and treated the same type of situation differently,
Yes.
because I came from an authentic, empowered place, and I
Mhm.
was able to state what I was experiencing, how that felt, what I next needed, how
Yeah.
could we partner, what would we agree to, what would we
Yeah.
agree to disagree, and
Yeah.
move forward so that the
Mhm.
collective, the
Mhm.
team, the company would continue to benefit,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so take that whole business analogy out into
However.
your friendships and into your communities.
Mm.
Um,
Can I name something that I see here that's there's like when we talk about balancing, on the one end, boundaries are important, but boundaries alone have, can get you into a place where you're tricking yourself and you're going to push things away or cut things away that actually need the dynamic tension of your discomfort for you to see what the reason why they came to you to disrupt you in the first place. And so then there's the boundaries, but then there's also the repair.
mm,
So like people think if I meet you and we become best friends and we get along and all this stuff, people think like, well, that's what makes us best friends. We always get along. And that's false. It's how do we repair damage when it's done? Because you will hurt me and I will hurt you. That's what deepens trust and connection is like repairing the little hurts that happen.
mhm,
Because then we get to see like, how do you deal with disappointment? Or if I tell you no, how do I deal with disappointment? Or if I tell you no, these things let us know these, like you're saying, those different facets you don't get to see when you immediately cut something or someone away. You rob yourself of things that you probably need to see in yourself, which is why we attract certain people to us anyway.
Yep.
That trigger shit in us where it's like, I love this. I thought I loved this person and they just make me so angry. And it's like, well, the way I see it, oftentimes I think the love that draws us in, the attraction we feel to certain people, that love that draws us in exists for many reasons. But in this instance, I'll talk about the purpose of it pulling you in close enough
Mm,
to hold the dynamic tension with that person, to feel what's in there that you need to see for yourself, for them to feel what's in there that they need to see for themselves.
right.
And that love brings us close enough to get that dynamic tension, like a gestation period, like a baby being made in a body. Like it allows for some third thing to emerge or be born from that dynamic tension, that discomfort. And I think like our relationships provide so many opportunities for that. But if we're just doing boundaries and no repair, then we're just cutting away our opportunities and keeping ourselves
Yeah.
kind of like stuck. I don't know.
I I can't even I don't even have the words to tell you all of the things that just popped in, like
I'm so glad.
all the friendships um where I've stepped away, they've stepped away, we had
Yeah.
the boundary, we had the this, we all of the things,
Yeah.
but the repair didn't happen, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
lost opportunities, right? Sometimes
And
it's just a growth thing. Sometimes it's
yeah.
a perfect alignment thing.
Hmm.
That lovely, a friend just sent me that, you're a friend for a season, a reason, or a lifetime.
Hmm.
And all of that can be all what it is.
Hmm.
But if you're a people pleaser and if you don't know what it means to have emotional maturity and the ability to sit in discomfort to a
Hmm.
place where um, you can then start to experience another thing. And I'm not going to call it good or bad, but the other thing, it's like, oh, both can be here and I'm
Yes.
still alive.
Yeah.
And that is beautiful, miraculous. It is
Hmm.
the ability to say, this over here, let's I'll judge it, right? It sucks.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's so painful. Like, oh,
I
that's
just don't,
painful.
I don't like it. It
I don't like
hurts.
it.
That doesn't have to make it good or bad, but it can identify your personal preference or your feeling around it,
Yeah.
which I think is, I was going to say really quickly, I
Yeah.
think if we're people pleasers, we can't but be good friends or partners. And the reason I say that is if I'm a people pleaser and I'm centering just making sure things are okay and not honoring how I really feel, if I'm willing to betray myself for safety, I won't even want to betray you, but I will because that's the programming I'm on.
Hmm.
So to me, when I meet people now that I can tell are still in a people pleasing place in a specific way, of course, like there's like a spectrum of it, right?
Hmm. There is.
It becomes easier for me to identify like, oh, I think this person is seeming to betray themselves in this certain way. They're not going to be able to show up for me in the ways that and engage in the kind of friendships, relationships that I want in my life. And that's okay. And I'm just identifying it. Again, it's the musical notes. Oh, they're playing that melody. All right, that doesn't harmonize with what the symphony I'm trying to experience. Perfect.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Very well said. So here's a question for you then.
let's hear it.
If that person comes into your life and you're like, hmm,
Hmm.
they're showing
Hmm.
those people pleasing
Hmm.
external uh, attributes, symptoms,
Sure.
signs, ways of
Yeah.
being. Do you say anything?
It depends on the person. It depends on in how we have come together. Are we going to work on something together? Are we spending time together? Am I integrating them into my life in some way? If
Mm,
the answer is yes, like if they're just an acquaintance that I see when I go do a certain thing out in the world, no
hmm.
big deal. I don't really say anything in that instance. And I just, because then I see them and I can enjoy them for who they are and what they are. And they're at a safe distance for me to still care for them. If we're integrating in some way, if I'm integrating them in my life, then I say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing with you. This is my story. It might not be yours, but here's what I'm experiencing. And here's what my wisdom of that and my experience of that tells me.
Hmm.
And so are they receptive to it? Let's say they are. In that instance, I really will tell people, then I want this friendship we're developing, this relationship we're developing to be a practice ground for us to both grow. And so I would actually like for you to do the uncomfortable thing and tell me if you don't like something, or if you don't want to show up that day, or, whatever. Like, can you trust me and trust yourself to know that you don't like it or you don't want to, and then trust that you can tell me outright you feel that way, and that whatever thing that makes you scared to speak up, that I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get mad at you. I'm not going to, you know, whatever. And can we both maybe see if that's what we have, if that's what's showing up, that we can use that to grow or
Yeah.
to expand together? Then amazing. What an opportunity that could provide. If they say no, or they're uncomfortable, I've certainly met people in my life who are uncomfortable with that, didn't see it the same way I did. Maybe my intensity around it or my intentionality around it was too much for them. I've had that happen like a lot. Um, then I go the other way. And my litmus test actually used to be when I lived in Hollywood. I used to, when I met up with friends, there was this place around the corner from my apartment. It was this French bistro. And when people wanted to hang out with me, I would be like, all right, cool, let's meet up at this place and have coffee. Bring your journal, bring a notebook. And if people weren't willing to for like 15 minutes, like I would sit down, hey, what's going on? Okay, cool. Set the timer for 15 minutes. Journal. You journal, I'm going to journal. We're going to sit here together with our coffee. You don't have to share with me what you journaled, but I felt like I want to be friends with people who are intentional and reflective. And this is the one way I could think of, like, that was unusual for me to be like, if you want to be my friend, we gotta get a journal together.
I
So in
love
my
that.
20s, that was my like litmus test in my 20s for my friendships.
Oh,
So
wow.
at least
I
one of
love
them.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I
Mm.
mean, we all have to find our litmus test, right?
I guess
Um,
so, yeah. And there can be
yeah.
different ones.
And so thanks for sharing too about like, you do have to have the perspective of who is this person to me? How is this person going to be in my life? Is it long term? Is it
Yeah.
important? Or is it that casual person that you run into every once in a while that actually doesn't mean so much, right?
Yeah.
And it's a good practice
Mm.
because I think a lot of times in the recovering people pleaser state,
Mm.
that's a hard moment of like, do I say something or do I not say something?
Yes.
Do I point it out? But what I loved about the way you said things is that you
Mm.
used I. And I think that's such a powerful tool in any
Mm.
conversation where you're
Yeah.
like, this is what I'm seeing. This may be my story, but it may not be your story. This may be
Yeah.
my experience. I'm sitting with whatever this is, and I'm looking at whatever
Hmm.
came up. And you're not putting
Hmm.
blame or shame or
No
judgment
need.
on that person.
No.
You're just reflecting what you
Mm.
experienced. And
Hmm.
then the conversation has to kind of be organic at that point. It has to be one of
Yeah.
those, you're going to figure it out. Like that person's
Yeah.
going to respond to you in a way, or
You're gonna
they're going to
know.
respond to you in a different way.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and, you know, sitting with whatever that is. Because
Yeah.
if you have an expectation that, oh, they're going to hear me and they're going to understand and we're going to have a better
Yeah.
relationship after I share my truth.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's not going to happen all the time. Most of the time.
Maybe most times.
Most.
Yeah. I might
Most.
have the desire for that. That's a big one I've learned. I'm trying to learn how to do better, is like holding the reality of, like, I do desire that. I hope that's the outcome. And all right, it's probably not going to be, or it might not be. And so
Yeah.
can I accept that? And if I
Yep.
can accept that, then yeah, then it's safe to move forward and then just be present for the response.
Yes. And that's powerful
But
medicine, right? Like,
yeah.
you know, if I think about it from my perspective of like holding sacred space for someone to
Mm.
explore and to unwind and to heal, or I
Yeah.
don't know if I even like that word anymore, but to shift and change and to, all of that.
Yeah.
Um, it's that I'm so used to holding the container. And so when I'm in personal relationships in my life, or
Yeah.
relationships that are not in that sacred space,
Hmm.
it's easy for me to hold it inappropriately, where it's not
Yeah.
necessary, right? And
Yeah.
so, yes, I do have desire to, and I think it's powerful when you can state it like, I've been
Hmm.
noticing this, and I I have been feeling this and I desire to have whatever it is, and ask for what you desire.
Yes.
And I try very hard in my life not to use the word need.
Yeah.
Because for me,
Interesting.
something to think about for everyone else, for me, need implies some form of codependency or some form of having someone else do something,
Yeah.
right? But when it
Yeah.
is my desire, that
Yes.
means I feel it, and I feel it viscerally in my body. I feel it emotionally,
Yeah.
and I feel it mentally. Like I desire whatever it is that I'm desiring. Sometimes
That's
it's a
a
cookie, and other times it's a person.
that's so great. Well, because it's like, what do we really need? Water, air,
Yeah,
like there's things we need, and then there's something that you just desire. That makes that such a great distinction. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
yeah. I
I wanted
learned
to
that.
ask,
Go
oh,
ahead.
where you learned that where?
I learned that in my tantra schools and my tantra practices, because
Ah,
when
yeah.
you can
Of
state your
course.
desire, of course, right? When you can state your desire
Like
and you
that.
can own your desire, you can give that desire to yourself. And then
Yes.
it leads to pleasure.
Yep.
And,
Oh, that's so
that's a
great.
whole nother podcast for us, but it's where I learned it. It's like, I don't need um, someone to say something or do something or turn me on. Like
Hmm.
that's a desire that I have a desire to have
Yep.
that feeling. And it goes
Yeah.
way beyond um tantra world. And I've used it too, like food.
I like
Food's
that.
a big thing in my life. It's a journey that I've been on my whole life around too much food, too
Yeah.
less food, food. It's all
Yes.
complicated, but it's not so much anymore when I ask my body, what do you desire?
Yes.
What do you
Wow.
desire? You know, and she'll say it, whatever it is, and I'm like, I'm willing to give that to you. Like it's in that kind
Mm.
of a relationship. It's internal and it's something inside. But
Yes.
when you are working with another, when the person is
Hmm.
outside of yourself, you can still state your desire. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean they're going to give it to you.
It feels like there's something about this tool, like this, what you're talking about, that feels like it creates the space for what you desire to be a choice and not a compulsion.
Hmm.
Like if I put it out here to say I desire it rather than like I need it, then it's almost like a compulsory thing, like breath, or versus let me put it out here and notice that I just desire it. Well, then there's the space to realize or recognize the choice around it or not.
Yeah.
That feels really important too. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
all of this is choice, right? Like
Sure.
this whole concept of you don't have to like everybody, and then even the musical notes and the way that
Mm,
you're building, the music, um,
mm,
that's all by choice.
yeah.
And it's taking that personal responsibility to
Yes.
create and to
Hmm.
partner and to be with and to
Hmm.
allow for,
Yeah.
versus it's all happening to me. I can't have what I want. Um,
Oh, what
and
a powerless place.
right.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people in our world right now in that place,
Yes.
you know.
Understandably, in many scenarios.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, I also learned, I don't know, this popped in. Um, so the people in the world that are feeling like life is happening to them
Hmm.
and they have no control and
Yes.
decisions are being made that they don't align with or they don't like,
Yes.
you know, I love the revolutionary spirit,
Yeah.
and I love the opportunity to like, oh yeah, let's go, let's get it, let's do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's
Let's
a time
change
and a
it.
yeah, and there's a time and a place for that. But the reality
Right.
in my world,
Yeah.
not the world, not your world, but in my world, which consists of me.
Hmm.
And so I am the sun of my
Yeah.
world, of my
Yes.
galaxy, right? And so you we all have the opportunity to say, what do I desire in my world? And
Mm,
how can I be with what I desire, and how can I express that
mm,
desire, and then how can I create that desire, and how can
yes.
I share that desire, that
Yep.
creation that I built or thought or whatever out of my desire in a
Yes.
way that is just is,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
We don't look at a mountain or a stream or a tree and say, what was your intent? Why were you built? Why do you exist?
Why
Like,
is the most useless question I feel like I've encountered in my spiritual quest of life. Like,
yeah,
why is a question I don't know that I really can ask anymore on some things.
right. But we in the
We
past you have,
do.
and in the
Oh,
past I have,
yeah.
and
Oh,
we question it all.
yeah.
And there's a time and a place for questioning, and then there's a time
Yes.
and a place to stop trying to control everything in
Yeah.
the world and
Yeah.
start taking that self responsibility for my world. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
my world's super simple, honestly, you guys. I live in Newburgh, Oregon, and I have a cat named Violet. And my
Violet.
world, most of the time, is Violet and I. And
I
that's my
love that.
world, you know. And then I go out and I do sessions and I travel and I teach.
Yeah.
And then that becomes part of my world. But
Yeah.
then I return to my simple world of my cat and
Mm-hmm.
I, right? So,
Yeah.
like, all this other stuff that's going on in the environment and the weather's constantly changing in this environment
Right.
is not my experience. It does not define me. It does not have to shake me in a way, right?
No. Yeah.
um and I think the more time you spend in your own individual world and you sit
Yes.
with what is,
Yeah.
the more capacity you have for being able to go out into the world and not be a
Yeah.
people pleaser and create harmonic experiences, and to take
Mhm.
all the things that jar you, that are unexpected,
Yeah.
and just be like, oh, that there it
Yeah.
is, right?
Yes. That I wanted to say something about that too, like the value in having your own world and like what it does allow as far as the space for you to understand and witness yourself. I think one of the things that's been on my mind lately a lot in some of these like dichotomies, like the seesaw of things,
Mm-hmm.
is that people pleasing to me feels like it's an inverted. I never said this out loud, so I'm gonna kind of canvas
Please.
it. But
Yeah.
I think about tyrannical energy and then the people pleasing, like, I will do whatever you want to just make sure everything's okay. Like that these seem to occupy these sort of mirrored places in the sense that tyrannical energy is like, I'm going to control everything out here because I refuse to be vulnerable. And then
Mm.
people pleasing is almost like a different type of trying to control everything out here so I don't have to be vulnerable. They're like these mirrored images of each other in a specific way that even though you ask somebody what's the difference between a tyrant and a people pleaser, they'd be like, there's nothing in common. And I'm like, no, the common thread is like an inability or a mistrust in being vulnerable
Mm.
and trying to control the outside through these different energetic means. And I find that to be an important thing right now I'm reflecting on that a little bit because we're seeing all of it out there, right? We're seeing it in
Right.
different,
I,
showing up
I can
in
feel
different
the
people.
the truth of what you just said,
Yeah.
because being vulnerable,
Mhm.
um, is a human experience. It's also, I mean, if you think about, well, I'm going to use a snake as an example. It is the Chinese Year of the Snake, so I think it's
Ooh,
somewhat
yeah.
appropriate, right?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
So when a snake sheds its skin, it
Yeah.
is extremely vulnerable,
Mm.
right? And
Yes.
it needs to rest. It needs to stay in shade. It doesn't have the skin that it once
Mhm.
had, and it's baby soft, fresh, very
Mm.
vulnerable
Mhm.
to things that,
Mm.
rocks, sharp rocks,
Yeah.
sunshine, like, and I share that because I want us all to remember that vulnerability is not an exclusive thing to humans.
Mhm.
Everything has a vulnerability. And
Mhm.
the thing about the snake, though, is it's a natural process. It grows its skin, it sheds its skin, new skin is grown, it sheds its
Mm.
skin.
Mm.
So when I think about that, I think, oh, vulnerability is is necessary.
So, yeah.
It's necessary. If you're
Yeah.
not creating moments for you to have vulnerability,
Mm.
that's something to think about. Why are you avoiding it? What
Yeah.
is so wrong with it?
Yeah.
How does it make you a people pleaser? How does it make you a judger, a critic of
Mm.
yourself and others? Like,
Yeah.
somebody asked me, do you feel comfortable crying in public? I didn't for a long time. And
Same, but now I do. Now I'll
oh,
cry
no, I
anywhere.
do. It's so wonderful. It's so
Yeah.
freeing. Like, I literally can cry in the grocery store and I don't care. Right? If they
I've definitely cried in the grocery store
totally,
for
me too.
sure.
Or
Yeah.
I cry at a song. If I'm in some public place and I
Oh
hear a song that
yeah.
I really love and
Oh
it brings emotion to me, I'm gonna
yeah.
cry. Right?
Same. Yeah.
Um, and I've done the ugly cry.
Oh
Not the pretty
yeah.
cry where it's just really pretty, like tears falling down your cheek and you
I
look
feel like
all
all of my crying is ugly crying. I don't think I have that one. I think it goes straight to like,
all right, so how can you make ugly crying beautiful?
I mean, accepting it.
Yeah, exactly,
Like,
right? Me too.
it's what
Like,
I do. I wanted to ask you something too. Like, do you think that you know, the love that everyone's so just desperately seeking, can it be experienced without vulnerability?
it's a great question. Um, my instant answer was no.
Mine too. I don't think you can. I think it's required for that. And that's what blows my mind about between people pleasing and tyranny kind of energy. Both are trying to get that love and that security that everyone naturally craves through a means under which it cannot be acquired. It cannot be experienced
Yeah.
without the vulnerability and the willingness to be hurt. Like that. There's oh, do I have it right here? I do, but I don't know where it is. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. Oh no, I
Oh,
do.
and
It's right here.
I have that one too. It's over here. Yeah, that's it.
He talks about joy and sorrow being inextricable from each other. And I told you we planted a magnolia tree in my family's backyard in memory of my stepdad who passed in 2022. I delineate that he's my stepdad because I have like three dads, but whom I love so much, and there's only one left. So, um, but he we planted this magnolia tree. And have you smelled a magnolia flower?
I have.
Just the most beautiful jasmine flowers too, I love, but magnolia, oh my God, what a divine scent.
Hmm.
So in July of this year, it was like I think two buds were left on the tree. And I realized like, oh my God, all the buds are almost gone. And I went back there and I smelled one. And it was so amazing. It was like, oh my God, what a divine smell. Like, what a beautiful experience to be able to smell this flower.
Hmm.
And I pulled my face away from the flower and I just immediately started sobbing because I realized like this flower's going to die. I'm never going to smell this bud again. And it hit me. I had this new layer. I'm going to probably cry right now. I had this new layer of emotional understanding, like this new depth of understanding around the fact that anything you want that's pleasurable, any joy you want to experience, anybody you want to be in love with, like you cannot have those experiences without the correlating pain.
Yeah.
They're inextricable. And I'm like, "Oh my God, no." Like it's real. I realize I'm like, "Oh yeah, you don't get out a lot." Like light only exists because there's shadow and vice versa. And so of course like we've heard these things said time and again, they've become trite for some of us, and yet the truth in them and the emotional like integration of that truth is so profound and necessary to feel peace. And I find that really interesting. And I see how in the world right now, like how desperately, like whoever is able to take that in and understand that we need to do it right now.
I agree with you 100%. Yes.
Ugh.
Maybe some can understand it from this perspective. If you're in partnership with someone and you
Hmm.
disagree about something and you
Yeah.
end up having an argument, or maybe you even have a nice discussion about it, but it's still quite hostile. It's still,
Like, ugh,
and
I
so
just don't agree.
yeah, right. And you
Mm.
break it down, and you've got to share your truth. You've got to share your perspective. It is that
Mm.
vulnerable step. You have to like put yourself out there, right? And
Yeah.
and maybe even in that conversation, you get to the truth of the root of it. Like,
Hmm.
oh, actually, when I was a kid, this happened and that happened. And therefore, when you
Yeah.
said, I heard, I felt triggered.
Yes.
And,
It
but
pressed
that's,
on that wound.
yes, it's so horrible. Or, God, sometimes it rips the whole scab off and then
Yeah.
you're raw and it hurts.
Yes.
So, but in that, it's that vulnerability and you learn and you grow, and that person, hopefully you have compassion for yourself for that. But then the
Yeah.
other person that you're having this conversation with sees you in a different way and finds you even more beautiful or more loving or more whatever, and
Yeah.
falls in love that one next step. And because you had that vulnerability, that discord, that it led to greater intimacy and because of
Yes.
your vulnerability. So I always try to remind myself that vulnerability is worth the risk
Yes.
and it's worth the experience. Even
Mm-hmm.
if I'm ugly crying, snot's running down my nose, I'm feeling blah.
Mm.
If we can stay in it, whether it be a family member, a partner, a friend, whatever, if you can stay in it long
Mm.
enough and say, I'm committed to understanding, I'm committed to sharing, like you don't even have to
Yeah.
say that, but inside you're saying it like,
Yeah.
hey, and then, even if you have to take a break, I
Oh
have,
yeah. You got to
you
titrate it
totally
because
take a break
everybody needs to be within their window of tolerance to make the
completely.
progress. But you're right. Yeah.
And friends and people need to say, when we get in there, because we will, like you said, we're going to disagree. So when we're in
Mm.
this conversation, if you reach your
Yeah.
max, you got to put your hand up. You got to, say the magic word, the safe word, whatever it is. And then that other person says, okay.
Yeah. We
And,
have to agree.
and you stop.
Yep.
But if you don't set up, I've learned if you don't set up that what are we going to do when, not
Yeah.
if, what are we going to do
When.
when, how are we going to manage, that's a
Yes.
really bad word for it, but it kind of is a managed thing. How are we
Yeah.
going to do that? How are we going to respect ourselves? How are we going to respect each other? Like,
And it will require both people, as you know. Because if
yes,
I'm like, Dani, I need a break, it does require you to also say, okay,
I hear you.
and vice versa. And
Yeah,
that's interesting to notice too, that it does take both
it does.
people
And
kind
honestly, I don't think enough people talk about it proactively because
of,
it's not an if, it's a when.
and we're not taught about this. We're not taught why that's important. The public is just now learning about boundaries, and we're still really struggling with conflict resolution and repair, which is required for any revolution,
Yes, yes, it is.
macro or micro, within your own little internal self, with your relationships and with the world. Like
Yep,
it's so fascinating.
I love it.
Wow. Me too.
Well, let's sit with
Mhm.
where we are, and if there's anything else either one of us wants to
Mm,
share.
I feel
There is something I
complete.
want to share about you, but
Oh,
with the audience. And so, one of the things I
do
didn't
tell.
mention when I introduced Tiffany was, and I think I'm hoping that through the experience of this podcast, you have seen how beautiful Tiffany can coach and hold
Mm,
sacred space and have it be somatically related, right? And so I want to highlight that if you're looking for a coach, you should reach out and see if she has time, see
yeah.
if it's a good fit. Like, um, there are not enough people that can handle
Yeah.
the all of it all and
Yeah.
ask the right questions and hold the space. And then I delete the right. Ask the questions.
Yeah.
So
Thank
I
you.
thought you showed up beautifully coaching in that beautiful, like, coaching
Mm,
way, right? Like,
thank
not
you.
everyone's a coach, but you
Yeah.
definitely are.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Yeah. I'm open. I am accepting clients. So if anybody is
Awesome.
interested,
Yep.
you
And
can,
coaching doesn't have to happen in person, which is the best thing,
yeah, I
you
do it
know?
over, Google Meet or whatever anybody uses. Has been really wonderful. I've had some
Yep.
incredible experiences with people. I love it. I love doing it. So,
I do
yep.
too. Yeah, I'm
Come see
glad.
me.
Yeah, look her
Reach
up.
out.
All of her contact information will be in the summary notes. So
Mm,
I feel pretty complete around this.
I feel complete. Yeah.
Okay, great. So just as a reminder, um, you don't have to like everyone. And there are ways in which you can create all these beautiful notes and have them all work together and
Yeah.
create newness, right? And if you are a people pleaser and you didn't know it, and through this conversation, you just were like, whoa, I do that. I'm always trying to be nice to everybody. I'm always thinking about everybody else first. You have Tiffany as a resource, you have me as a resource. And if it's
Yeah.
not us, then we have resources. So,
Sometimes
so
it's
Tiffany, thank you
happening.
so much for joining me today. Thanks
Of
for the
course.
conversation and all your wisdom. And
Thank you.
for those that are listening to the podcast, if you enjoyed it or you learned something from it, please share it. It is the
Yes.
best way for both Tiffany and I to expand our awareness to other people. And we are grateful for that and for you for being here with us. And we send you our love and our gratitude. So until we connect again, have a wonderful rest of your moment.